crowdfunding agency called CrowdfundX. We started off managing crowdfunding campaigns, reward-based crowdfunding campaigns for celebrities and brands on Indiegogo and Kickstarter. As of last summer, when Regulation 8+ came into effect through the Jobs Act, we made a transition into the more into the equity space, and I've been fortunate enough to be involved in some of the largest equity crowdfunding campaigns through Reg A thus far, including Elio Motors, XDI Aircraft. We've raised many millions of dollars on those projects, and now I spend a lot of my time just evangelizing crowdfunding, talking about it. I'm a big believer in where it is now and where it can go in the future. And also, I'm very excited to hear what everyone is working on right now.
All right, very nice. I work in crowdfunding and have to tell you, this is literally a panel of experts here. A lot of successful campaigns. I'm excited to hear about some of these strategies. I get asked about crowdfunding campaigns all the time. I always start with the word pre-launch. Is that the place to start? And if so, what do you guys recommend for pre-launch? And if you'd like to back it up a step further, get into the research, validating the market, that's great as well. But what is the first thing someone wants to run a crowdfund? Let's do, pop in whenever you'd like.
Well, I would just like to take a step back and thank you for being an amazing impromptu moderator. You're just like, here we go.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll jump in since I tend to do guerrilla projects that have no assets, no celebrities, no audience built. So usually people are calling me up when they're like, hey, I've got something in the 20 to 60 range, and I have no idea what I'm doing. I usually recommend about 90 days of prep. And that's primarily collating, organizing the audience and the network that you already have to create something that I call a social echo. So building a team of people that are going to help you do this, that have access to networks that you don't have, and then I spend 15, 20 hours training on how to utilize those networks in an efficient way, and also so that you're not bugging your friends or pestering people. You want to create a campaign that's attractive. So once you've done all the correct prep work, the ideal is that you launch with a pretty big launch, which happens most of the time, and all that prep work is done so that you have pretty smooth sailing. Most of my clients are not working 8 hours a day on their campaign like you see in every blog, unless they haven't done the prep. And then it's a hellish nightmare for 30 to 40 days, and you're exhausted, and you probably won't be successful. So prep is super huge. Make sure you have some sort of strategy or plan for it.
Excellent. And Taylor, you said you wanted to take it a step further back too?
Well, I just want to I want to build off of what Justin was saying, and there is a misconception that platforms create money, and if you just launch a project onto Kickstarter or onto Indiegogo, random lovely people will just start giving you money.
Yeah.
And that might have been a little bit of the case years ago, but now, really in the best case scenario, the platform only accounts for about 6% of your raise. And so you need to think back about what the word crowdfunding means, and if you don't have your crowd to fund when you launch your campaign, you're not putting yourself in a position to succeed. So the longer you can give yourself to build up a big email list, build relationships with bloggers and influencers, build up a big social media following, the better chance you have at a very successful launch.
I had a client contact me earlier this week, and she was exactly the kind of client you want. She goes, well, so I've already identified these 6 other raises that are similar to ours. I've researched all of the bloggers and press releases that help them get there. I've identified people in my own network who know those bloggers, and we're ready to, and I've pre-written our what kind of content we're going to push out to those people. Do you think that we can work together? And I was like, more clients like this, please. Yeah. So at Black Box Group, we line up an advertising schedule, we line up a PR schedule, we line up an organic marketing and organic content schedule. And that's all, we design banner ads, do all the graphics. make sure we have access to all of the social media accounts, have pixels and tracking and data behind all of those social media accounts, and lay all that groundwork and that foundation, usually about 2 months in advance.
Yeah.
Sure.
So,
Steven, what about the Awesome Asian Bad Guys? Any examples for pre-launch from that or from your other campaigns?
Yeah, absolutely. So with that project specifically, you know, one thing that we haven't talked about so far was just the video. And obviously the importance of the video, that's something that, you know, really is a way for you to sort of connect personally with the audience, and really, you know, bring that sort of emotional reasons for like why you're doing this. And I feel like, you know, that for us was a huge piece for us to really spend a lot of time working on the video, making the best video possible. And then secondly, we did form a really good relationship with a popular blogger within the Asian American community. His blog is called Angry Asian Man, and so it was a good fit for Awesome Asian Bad Guys. And built a relationship over time and invited him to be an executive producer on the project. And so that was incredibly huge for us. We had a YouTube presence and a bit of a Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter presence, but his audience was much larger than ours. And it wasn't a sort of instant connection. We didn't just say, hey, you've got a really big audience, we've got this great project, will you support us? But it was really building that trust, that relationship over time, where he sort of knew who we were, believed in our ability to carry out this project, and that was a huge benefit for us before we even hit go on the project.
Excellent, excellent. Hey, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Anything on the reward-based crowdfunding side that startups should definitely make sure is checked off in terms of structuring and making sure they're properly set up?
Yeah, so I think there's certainly, you know, these other pre-launch aspects around figuring out how you're going to find the crowd and who's going to, you know, promote and sort of who's going to sing your song. But there are just some nuts and bolts you have to be careful about or have to plan for. So whether you're doing rewards-based or looking at an equity raise, you know, you have to have an entity. I think that's the way to go. If you're, you know, promoting, you know, a product or a film or a project that involves intellectual property, make sure you know who owns the intellectual property, or that you've locked down all the rights there, or that you're not infringing anyone else's intellectual property in that process. And if you're going to be doing an equity-based round, you absolutely have to have an entity from the get-go. You should have some structure. If you have multiple founders, you should have agreements by and among you. So there are some of these, you know, unfortunate legal pieces that should be in place before you go out to the crowd.
And Francisco, anything to add for pre-launch, or just what you look at for a key component for crowdfunding?
Well, for my experience, the first things you have to keep in mind is really how much do you want to raise? Because if you want to make a $50,000 crowdfunding campaign, fine. If you want to make a $1 million campaign, that's another part of it. And that's complete another game. So let's consider a mid-range scenario. I wasn't interested in how much I raise. I was interested in how much product I would have sell with my crowdfunding. Our aim was to selling 10,000 of hardware, and we beat it. We make it near 11,000, so I'm pretty happy. But the preparation was really huge, because selling 10,000 products on the internet in 1 month is not that easy, especially if you are not acknowledged from a crowd, you're not a famous person, you do not have maybe all the contacts to get the press on, because maybe you're not relevant to them, even if your product is interesting, because it's a little lobby, okay? Sure. Especially in some market. So the question is, how much do you want to raise? What's really your goal? And based on that, even 3 months of preparation for me is not enough. Sure. When we started our campaign, I was having 350,000 email organically created, no marketing invested, because of one viral video, which cost pretty much less than a multi-million-dollar campaign. So be sure that your assets are great, because what you show to the people, what you show to the crowd is what you are going to really sell. And the emotional attachment of what you are doing should really prevail on the logic of, oh, I don't want to use my credit card today.
Yeah. Based on a little convert.
Yes.
Justin, good point brought up there about setting the right goal.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that a little bit in terms of audience size and how a company can figure out their best option for goal?
Yeah, it definitely ranges with, like what Francesco was saying, with what your goal is, what your product is. So for example, a $20,000 short film, 3 or 4 people with your average 1,000-person Facebook contacts, Facebook friends, and maybe 1,000 emails or something like that. Like a small list. They haven't really built an audience. You can spend 2 or 3 months adding maybe a couple thousand people into the Facebook and Twitter network, and you can fund 20 to 30,000 pretty simply. But even once you hit 50 or 60, it's a whole new ball game. And if you're going for 100,000, 500,000, a million, you're raising funds for a game or a product or a technology piece, the ballpark really changes, and it's really about leveraging the assets that you have, making sure they're really, really great, and having adequate prep time. I mean, even for myself, I raised 60,000 for my short. I'm also a filmmaker, and so for my second short, I raised 64,000 for a sci-fi film, and we spent 6 to 9 months of time, creating pictures and images and posts and doing research, and that's for a little tiny short film. So if you're going anything bigger, even than 20 or 30, you've got your work cut out for you.
Taylor, Elio Motors, how much did that one raise?
I believe it's in the 15 to 20 million range.
15 to 20 million.
Yeah.
So how does someone prepare for a crowdfund like that? What does the pre-launch look like? How do you validate that goal? As Justin's mentioning, these goals are tough to hit. How can you step into a project of 6 figures, 7 figures, 8 figures, and build a strategy to produce that?
Well, the amazing thing about that particular campaign was we were very fortunate to get involved with them at the right time, where Elio Motors had been around for a couple years, and they had been doing some form of audience building and pre-selling before we came on board. So they had an amazingly passionate fan base, and they would have these events around the country where they would take the car, which is, if you haven't heard of Elio Motors, it's a 3-wheeled vehicle that gets 84 miles per gallon and sells brand new for about $6,800. So they would take their car around the country and they would show it off, and people would pre-order the vehicle there, and they would actually have shirts printed up with the pre-order number on them. People were passionate about this, and fans had their own hierarchy built in, where if you had one of the top 10 cars, you were really cool. If you had one of the cars that was like number 3,000, 4,000, you weren't as cool. And so when we came on board, people really wanted to get involved in what was happening, and so all we had to do was make sure that the video was great, the assets were great, that the strategy up to and through launch was successful, and then just communicate with that audience and treat that audience really well, and the audience responded. Mm-hmm. So I think, going back to what some of the comments were here, determining how much you want to raise is really contingent upon the assets that you have and the crowd that you have going in. Mm-hmm. And if you have a huge audience that's rapidly excited about if you're trying to create like a second version of a video game that had huge downloads for the first version, the odds are you can be pretty successful because that's something people want. If you're trying to raise a couple million for something that no one's ever heard of and that no one's excited about yet, you have a lot more prep and work to do.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, thank you.
That was a Reg A Plus deal, wasn't
Yes.
it? Right, and the full amount you raised was all equity. It wasn't. It was all equity under
Yes.
Reg A Plus. So just to clarify that, so raising $50 million is ambitious, no matter how you're going to go about it. Whatever the sort of legal framework is. In terms of general equity crowdfunding, you can't raise $15 million. You'd have to go under Reg A Plus or 506C, which is a different offering mechanism. So for most people who want to raise sort of up to $1 million, the new equity crowdfunding under Title III is the way you're going to go. But you're not going to get beyond $1 million basically in a 12-month period. And I think, one of the takeaways here is, you've got to have that audience, you have to have the enthusiasm, but the Reg A Plus method, it's a little bit more intensive, there are more legal steps, there's more compliance, it's opened up a lot of opportunity, but I think last year something like 60 or 70 people sort of started the process of Reg A Plus. I think probably less than 10 actually got out and raised money. So it's a very rigorous process. And, as he mentioned, the company had been around for a while. Maybe they had early funding. I don't know all the background. But you have to have the resources to pay for that process, in addition to the fan base and the enthusiasm.
And I think just to go off of that, each platform has its own benefits, and each type of crowdfunding has its own benefits. So I wouldn't look at one type of crowdfunding and saying, oh, this way will raise me millions of dollars and this way will only raise me hundreds. I think it's very smart to work with a consultant or with an agency and say, like, this is what I want to do. What is the best route to do it?
Could you speak a little bit more about what you see about Title III and how it's going to emerge and change the landscape?
Sure. So Title III was sort of the last piece, if you will, of the Jobs Act to be codified by the SEC, which is a fancy way of saying blessed. It took the SEC a long time to create the regulations necessary to actually create equity crowdfunding. So, the old system was that you could only raise money privately, basically from people you knew or people you were introduced to. And Title III now allows you to go out to the crowd, to all types of investors, not just rich people, and solicit investments from them. So the Title III regulations were adopted, I want to say maybe in November, December. There was a waiting period. In this May, and I don't have the date in front of me, all of the regulations will be sort of fully implemented and ready to go, which means that crowdfunding portals will be licensed and able to operate in the United States. And so if you're a person that wants to raise equity crowdfunding under Title III, you will actually run your campaign, if you will, through these funding portals. So you cannot, for example, just to say what you can't do, you can't just run your own crowdfunding campaign on Facebook. You have to actually engage with a portal who will run your campaign in compliance with the SEC regulations, get the information out, make sure the investors have the information they need. You have to make some filings with the SEC. But that process will be largely run by these portals. So in that process, you can raise up to $1 million from thousands of people in small increments. But you can only do up to $1 million. You have to have financials, a bunch of other stuff. So that will start, I think, opening up later this month and certainly over the summer. I get a lot of calls from people that want to run portals. I think a lot of people think that that's how they're going to make money in the crowdfunding movement, and maybe that's the case, maybe it isn't. But so far that's where the activity is going to be focused, I think, in sort of the first phase of Title III.
Adam, building an audience for an equity crowdfund, whether it's accredited or non-accredited, what are the best steps for that if you're going after high net worth individuals, accredited investors? What type of VC techniques can be looked at for bringing on your anchor investors, similar like on a reward crowdfund, but on the equity side?
Yeah, so let me make one brief distinction before I dive into that. We use the term crowdfunding. And crowdfunding has kind of a dirty word in the venture capital world. Let me just reframe that a little bit. Normal people. You're raising money from normal people. Anyone who's not the 1%. So, the neurologist that only makes $200,000 a year. He's the crowd, Okay, so that's it. When we look to find an anchor investor or a lead investor in a company, it starts off as a function of marketing and a function of empathy. Who is your client? Who is your customer? Who's the person that's a good match, a good advisor, a good, where does the strategic capital come from? If you're a food company and you want to get into Whole Foods, maybe someone in that channel would be a good anchor investor. If you're more in the media or more in the technology space, maybe you want a good anchor investor that's on that side. So once you kind of know who that person is, you have an image for what that person or organization is in your head, then we have to go out and find it. And we do that from everything from buying mailing lists and generating advertising campaigns to scouring our personal network, phone calls to venture capitalists, personal friends, and just doing the hard legwork of finding these people and then engaging them in a way that is meaningful to them, making sure the message lands with them, And I mean, it's how to influence people ultimately.
Excellent, excellent. Francisco, any crowdfunding strategies that you've seen to be highly effective? Anything you'd emphasize to a brand who says, hey, I'm getting ready to do this, either on the reward or equity-based side? What would you recommend? What would you say, make sure you do? What would those steps be? What does that look like? It could be a bulleted strategy. It doesn't have to be one thing. But I get asked this a lot.
If I was having a magic wand of a crystal sphere to understand, every campaign is a different gamble.
Sure.
This is the basic feeling of my experience with crowdfunding. So even if you consider that right now only 10% of a campaign on Indiegogo are successful. Yes, Kickstarter is more 40%, but Kickstarter, have a little bit more of audience constructed. But consider this: only 10% of a crowdfunding campaign has success. So, in my opinion, depending on your goal, you should be prepared to have a very good PR agency. You have to prepare to have a very good video maker which help you and do a great video. You have to be prepared to have a small amount of budget depending on your goal to promote that. I know some numbers from the market of $1 million campaign. That doesn't happen for magic.
Sure.
There is always a very, very good amount of professional and agency that are there and following the client, suggest them what is the correct budget in Facebook advertising. And again, if a product doesn't resonate with the masses, you will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars or thousands of dollars in promotion that doesn't succeed, because in the end of the day, crowdfunding you can consider like a common e-commerce platform where you have a limited amount of time, so it's more time pressure, and this gives you maybe a little bit more conversion rate. But in the end, it's only about conversion rate. People get in, people see the product, decide to buy or not, and the conversion rate is the metrics that it is one of the most interesting. Yes, maybe how much people stand on the web page, the pixel tracking, maybe I can remarketing them,
but ultimately you can only put so much lipstick on a pig. If there's not good product market fit, you have to fix that. You have to fix the fundamentals of the business before the fundamentals of the business are still important in the whole project.
But if you see from the opposite side, actually what I believe, you really want to make a product. You really believe it is going to work. But if without investing all your whole life or whatever, you arrive to a level that you have a prototype, you have something you have to show, you can build credibility with your crowd, you can really test the market. For us, it's been really important because we had the opportunity to understand if a price point was correct, if the people was really wanting this product or not. Because why spending money on something that nobody wants?
Okay, excellent answer.
Yeah, just love to jump in. I think during a campaign, oftentimes when I was in the middle of my campaign, one thing that I was thinking about, people never talked about at the time, was how stressful it was how public humiliation was like top of mind for me, because I was telling everybody, hey, I'm trying to raise this money and I am nowhere near my goal, and I am trying to do everything I can to move the needle. And I think in terms of sort of like a typical life cycle of a crowdfunding project is, there'll be sort of like a burst, at the beginning out the gate over the first, few days, and then it sort of really just flattens and there's like no activity. And, I remember doing as much work in the middle portion of the campaign as I was at the beginning and the end, but it wasn't doing anything. It's like people stopped paying attention. And at the end of the campaign, I'd heard, oh, well, just hang on, don't worry. It all comes at the end. People, will come through then. And with 10 days left, our goal was $50,000. With 10 days left of a 30-day campaign, we had raised $15,000. So we still had $35,000 left to raise with 10 days. And my partner and I were just saying, okay, well, nobody wants this. This is going to be really, really embarrassing. I guess we just won't go out in public anymore. But it was true. People did come at the end. I think, a lot of friends were telling me later, oh yeah, I wanted to help at the end, or I wanted to be, what helped put you over the top, and I was like, why did you wait so long? And so I think just the 2 points that I'm trying to make are just sort of understand that it can be very stressful. What you're doing is very public, and also know that the very nature of it is being sort of exciting and a lot more action at the beginning, really slow and painful in the middle, and more exciting and interesting at the end.
I think.
Oh, go ahead. No, I was going to say, a lot of that has to do with what the panel is saying about having the right amount of sort of fan base when you come out of the gate, right? So you have some sort of instant, if you will, recognition and momentum. But, the same is kind of true, and there are some parallels even with private fundraising, which is that, often you can get that first investor, you get the lead, and then you got to lock down all the rest of the money, right? So maybe you've gotten $500,000 in, but you're trying to get to $1 million, and there's a psychology to it, right? I mean, especially for the smaller investors, they want their money to have a lot of company, right? So the smaller, the smaller guys, or the last guys in the gate, they're not going to write the check until all the other checks are in. Mm-hmm. So there may be more passion and more enthusiasm because you can kind of see the product and you expect something, and get maybe a little bit more emotionally involved in a crowdfunding campaign. But in any investment cycle, that last dollar is actually the hardest dollar to lock down. So.
And that really speaks to the life cycle of the campaign, because you do have a good burst at the very beginning. Yeah. And in that initial burst, it is very critical to get to about 25% of your total goal. Because at the 25% mark, there's a perception shift where random people begin to think, oh, this might actually work. At the very beginning of the campaign, if you have raised $5,000 out of a $50,000 goal, random people might come to the page, they might have seen a little bit of press about you, they click the link, they land on your page, and they say, this is really cool, why have they only raised $5,000? I'm gonna come back in a little bit. And so, while you're doing your preparation, think to yourself, how can I engineer it? How can I create that perception of success? Get to 25 or 30% as soon as humanly possible, and then keep that momentum up. Keep people excited. Little mini games, little challenges, updates throughout the campaign, showing people how much fun you're having, how excited you are, how thankful you are, and so that by the time you get to the end, you haven't completely flatlined, and you're able to use that last week to get you over the hump.
And so for that initial burst, figure that maybe a way to calculate how much, you mentioned you want to get to 25% in that initial burst. How big is your list? How much does your product cost? If 5% of your list converts, are you going to get there? And if you work with if you're super on it, 7% of your list is going to convert, depending on what your conversion is.
Depending on the open rate of a email.
Yeah, open rate, and every click is a fall off, right? And then there's these other things where it's we've seen. So we'll do a little bit of pre-marketing sometimes. We'll test a certain price. We have a company wants to come in at $700. We're like, look guys, that's too high. Nothing will move. And we're like, look guys, drop it down to 500. Boom, the thing explodes. So there's a component of pricing strategy that you want to be very aware of as well. I mean, essentially people are buying something that doesn't exist. So if you're going, hey look, it costs this, if I can go to Target or Amazon and I can buy it at something similar at a price, I'm like, I can have that tomorrow. Amazon will have it in my hand this afternoon before I get home. A little drone will come and drop it in my hand. If I've got to wait 2 months, 6 months, 9 months to have it, you got to discount that in the price, and there's a risk to the purchaser as well.
Just along the lines of pricing strategy, I mean, I remember early on building out the rewards and putting a T-shirt at the $75 level, and
That's a good T-shirt.
I showed it to to my brother, who is somebody who has backed projects before, and his feedback was like, that's just really expensive, and right. So I was coming at it from the producer, right, from the producer angle, and I'm like, okay, at this level, like, we're gonna be able to raise more money, and his point was like, think about the person sitting on their computer, and they see this, and they're like, oh yeah, this is nice, but like, that's too expensive. His point was, people are shopping, right? They might like the spirit of your project, they might like be behind it, but at the end of the day, they just want something cool. So we lowered it to $50 for the T-shirt, which included like download of the film, and it was the #1 price level reward for us. And so that was a huge bit of advice that luckily I got before we launched, which can be part of the pre-launch, is also sort of getting that feedback from
picking the rewards. Yeah, absolutely. What are some examples of unique rewards you've seen convert very well? I know we've done brunch with celebrities for $10,000 rewards. We've seen a karaoke party for $1,500 with David Arquette. Like, there's been a whole list of different rewards that are very unique. Getting someone to spend more for something that money can't generally buy. Any examples of unique rewards?
Yeah. We had for our sci-fi for $100, which was way too low. My filmmaking partner is like a comic book illustrator and would take the Facebook profile photo of the person and turn them into a character in the world of the film. Nice. At first, it was custom. And then that stopped because we ended up, I think, like 70 or 80 of those. I think like 20% of our raise was just from that, and his hand cramped. So then it became like cool templates, but still, I mean, their face was drawn at least. And then we gave them like a whole mission dossier. Like we had some realtors who donated $1,000, and so we made them International Planet dealers, and we gave them like really badass suits. And then they like shared that with their network, and we gave them a square picture, right? So all the pictures were square, so they could be profile pictures on Facebook with the website on it, right? So always think too with your perks, how can this maybe even create some buzz or generate some like cool shareability stuff?
Yeah, ultimately you want it to be in alignment with your overall marketing strategy and
right.
brand, of course.
Right.
Mine, the favorite reward that I've come across isn't radically different from Justin's. This was for a zombie film that was set in like a desert town, an imaginary town. And one of the rewards that sold out really early was for, I think, $50, backers could name a street in the town. And what they would get would be a map that had all the street names, and they would have their street name highlighted there. And it's not going to appear in the film because it's a zombie movie, but it appears on a very cool map, and you can see like, oh, that scene takes place there, and my street's right around the corner. Yeah. Kind of a fun little thing, and the only thing it costs is a little bit of printing and postage.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We did it for $500. 10 people bought.
What was that, 10 people?
10 people bought the $500 name your place in our video game in the virtual world with your own name.
Very nice. Excellent, excellent. What are some of the best verticals for crowdfunding?
For the standard rewards-based campaigns, you really need a physical product. Mm-hmm. An artificial intelligence-based software generally isn't going to have legs. So a product that is niche and communicates well. Obviously, you want to engage a large group of people or a small group of very passionate people. Okay. But almost all the stuff that we see as successful has some sort of physical product behind it.
Yeah, things like apps are very tough.
Yeah.
That's where I live, is like films, which is an idea in somebody's brain. It's so wonderful when I get like a piece of technology or a product or a game or something like that, because I'm used to having to convince people why they should like a zombie film, another zombie film, another web series. In those cases, though, what I've seen is, again, like a really clear understanding of who is going to like the end project. So, I had a film that had some celebrities in it, like William Shatner, really struggle because, and they got tons of press and everything, but they really struggled because the people who were actually getting exposure to the project wasn't the audience. Alternately, I've had no-name people have a really successful web series. It was a season 2, so I think that sequel. I think Taylor, you were talking about that, about how there had already been an audience built in with season 1, and they had a successful festival run. So the first series had done really, really, really well. They didn't have a ton of YouTube subscribers. It wasn't like they had a giant audience. They still had to do that work, but they had some cachet. They had some track record of success. And then they raised $66,000 for a web series, for an independent web series, which is a lot in that space. So it really, I think being very clear about who's going to like and watch and be passionate about the finished and final product film. But the closer you get to a piece of intellectual property, which is an idea that doesn't exist yet, let alone a product that is cool but doesn't exist yet, you're going to have to be really clear about who's going to like that and make sure those people have an eye on it beforehand. I think when Stephen might have been talking about that. Let people preview the project. Make sure that they're passionate about it first before you launch. Because once you launch, you have publicly stated, judge me, and if you like it, then give me money. And you're only going to get a 5% conversion anyway, which is about the range. So 95% of the people who see it are going to be like, yeah, I'm out. So if you're going to get that 5%, you're going to get that 5% to give you $50,000, and the average donation maybe $70. Do the math. That's 100,000 people or more that need to see it before you get that conversion.
I'm excited that you brought that up. So you need to bring a lot of people to your page. 5% are going to convert. You need a lot of traffic coming through. How does one get that traffic? And let's make it a little more difficult. How does one get that traffic when troubleshooting? They're not hitting their milestones.
Jason, you're our head of advertising. Do you have any thoughts on the matter?
I'm just moderating here. Don't want to give away the magic. Come on. No. Any recommendations on how to produce traffic? Things you've seen work successfully. This could be press, influencers, advertising. What have you guys seen work? What would you recommend? And for what stages?
Yeah, if you can identify a celebrity or an influencer or someone that has access to a lot of eyeballs and personally cares about your space and what you're doing, if you can get them on board and you get them to promote what you're doing, that's as close to a big email list as you can get. Right. Yeah. So I would definitely spend a lot of early time trying to build those relationships.
So we have a network of 25 Playboy bunnies, which works for certain brands. Jason, can you talk about some of the other influencer networks that you've cultivated for us? I'm going to keep putting this back on you. I
spoke a little bit earlier, and I touched on influencers. I generally look for influencers with 60,000 to 2 million followers. I find they have very easy programs to work with. They have a rate card set up, and you want to have a calendar of steady posts from influencers to a campaign. I've personally worked with over 250, but there's thousands out there. You want to begin engaging them in the pre-launch stage. A lot of them won't want to post until you've raised 30% of your campaign or more, which I find consistent on the press side as well. But find people with active social audiences. Search your hashtags. Build out an influencer map. Begin reaching out to them and expect a lot of no's. Expect the sales type of conversion rate. If you reach out to 10 people and give you a rate card to be able to work with, that's actually good. So make sure you're reaching out to enough of them. But yeah, so traffic campaigns, making sure you have enough traffic coming to your actual campaign themselves. I guess that brings me to my next question, and this could be a difficult question. I understand everyone here has businesses, so it doesn't have to be in regards to working with an agency. But how much budget should a company have when thinking about doing a crowdfunding campaign? On the legal side, on the marketing side, on the development, video, what's the minimum amount they should have planned? Obviously, again, it's going to be more working with consultants and professionals, but what do they really need? Because as you mentioned, Taylor, you don't just put it up and people start backing it. You know, what should a company prepare?
I think it scales pretty quickly. So if someone's hiring me, I'm like super cheap, but I'm also doing $20,000 to $50,000 films, right? And I'm not an agency. I'm not going to shoot your film for you. I'm a consultant. So, you know, we spend a lot of time together, 15, 20 hours, but, I'm not doing anything, right? And that can go all the way, I don't want to speak specifically, but that can go up to a full service agency that is doing everything, shooting it, creating it, reaching out to influencers and everything. And I've heard some pretty intense high figures there, and I know, I'm sort of introing so you guys can give specifics. I know legal fees, if you're doing like Reg A and stuff, can balloon really quickly, so I'll let you guys talk about that. But it can be a couple $1,000s on the low end for a piece of intellectual property in that 20 to 50 range, or it can go to...
Yeah, all the way at the end. I think you're the most expensive one here. Do you want to start?
I try. We're kind of on the opposite end of that. So CrowdfundX will often charge up into the six-figure range for a campaign. But those are campaigns really where the client will pass us the ball and we run with it. It typically is for an organization that has other irons in the fire, is doing other things, doesn't have time for the entire organization to devote the time needed to the campaign, and that's where we can come in and make it happen for them. So it really depends on where you're at, what resources you have, and what your needs are.
So, the one thing I want to say about cost is this, is that I kind of like to tell clients, you can do it right or you could do it twice. I mean, that's sort of my jingle when people come in the office. Everyone wants to cut corners, or they can't afford it, or, whatever, but it's really important to have the right foundation. And this is, the other point is that, if you're doing a reward campaign and, people give the money and they see the film and they're happy and that's all good, and then you're done, right? Maybe they follow you, maybe they look for your next movie. But if you bring in investors into your company, they're pretty much there forever. They're like your relatives. You cannot get rid of them. So you ought to, think about sort of who you bring in, if you can, on the front end, and how many and so forth. But the point being, you have to have the right legal foundation to sort of bring them in, and then they're going to be there forever. So you have to continue to sort of recognize that you have to continue to have revenue. You have to have a real company. I mean, you have to have a way to support that ecosystem of having many, many, many shareholders in your company.
Excellent. Anything else anyone would like to add before moving to questions?
Well, geography matters. There are countries, maybe you build a list, it's organic, you don't know. I found out the bad way. Part of my list was from Brazil, part from India, Malaysia, other strange country, because it's internet, it's viral. You cannot make it and say, okay, now I want only US. Okay, when it can be getting viral on internet, you don't know where it is. But there are countries where the conversion rate of 1% is a miracle. For example, Brazil 0.001. India 0.00001.
Sure.
So know your target, know what list you are building, what crowd you are building, because US, yes, it's great. New Zealand, Australia, UK, Germany, basically everybody about Protestant and not Catholic. I don't know why, but this is what I discovered.
Yeah. Excellent.
And I'll just follow on to say that this is, if done well, this is the least expensive money you will ever raise.
Right.
It's not money that you'll have to pay back. It often is, it's closer to revenue than it is to debt, for sure, and often closer to revenue than it is to investment in a lot of cases. And the terms are generally pretty favorable. So, it's an expensive process, to hire professionals that, we've got 5 people in the room right here that are all on payroll, But done well, this is really the least expensive money you'll ever raise. So yeah, it's a good start for a good business.
And it's also important to think that while everyone wants the money might be what brought you to crowdfunding. It's only one of the benefits of it. You're going to come away with proof of concept, with some nice press. If it's a product, probably with, assuming you're successful, an increased valuation, and maybe some follow-on investor interest.
Yeah.
A passionate evangelical base of followers who have put money down to see you succeed, and you can continue to go back to for more support and more brand building in the future. All of these things are very, very crucial, and I often think that money might come third or fourth on that list, because if you haven't proven your concept, if you haven't built that base, then even with the money, you might not succeed in the long run. But I think it's important to factor all of those pieces in to run the campaign, and it can be a great experience.
I'm actually I'm gonna jump on that because I actually think that's the most important thing. Most of my films get offers of distribution in their first week if they've had a good launch. Most of them get into a lot more festivals. They sell out on Amazon when the DVDs come out. Their trailers get 100,000 views, and they're all mostly no-name, entities. Building, and then they go sit down and they do pitches and grant writing and that kind of stuff. And now all of a sudden they're a lot hotter than every other person who has a great idea in Hollywood. Additionally, Vimeo, there's a lot of companies, I'll speak generally, a lot of companies understand this, and that's where they are now shopping for new content, is crowdfunding. So like Vimeo and Indiegogo have a direct connection to where a successful campaign on Indiegogo gets looked at and viewed for distribution through Vimeo. There's a bunch of other examples that aren't coming to mind, but it's now almost the preferred channel. I mean, I think a third of Sundance's films were kickstarted. And I actually might be lower. It might be, I might be low on that. I think it might even be 40% had some sort of campaign. I could be mixing up some statistics, but it's a lot. So it's almost the new way that new media people who don't have those assets can make your mark is through crowdfunding. And that's intellectual property. We're not talking about projects and products that have arisen out of it. 3D printing has come out of crowdfunding, maker studios and that kind of stuff. So, or not maker studios, the maker movement. Anyway, I'm rambling, but yeah, build an audience. It's really what crowdfunding is for, and the fact that you get paid to do it instead of paying a publicist $2,500 to $6,000 a month to do it is awesome.
Excellent. So great information today on crowdfunding strategy, how to structure rewards, pre-launch, creative, getting an audience built, how to set up a Reg A Plus, and what type of anticipation should be considered, all types of great examples of campaigns. Before moving to questions, just want to give everyone a round of applause for the great expertise today. Excellent. And actually, could we share contact info if someone want to get in contact?
Sure. TheKickstarterGuy.com. It's pretty easy.
Black Box Group, BLAK, boxgroup.com.
I'm with Raines Feldman, RAINES FELDMAN. It's a law firm in Beverly Hills.
Fodder.io.
I work with Ovation Television. It's ovationtv.com.
The company that I'm an advisor of, crowdfundx.io. If you'd like to get in touch with me, we can meet up after. I can give you my email, but it's very long, so I'll save everyone the time.
Sure. Perfect. I'm Jason Fishman. I can be found on LinkedIn. No one's pulling me off the stage, so does anyone have any questions at the moment? Up front?
Can anyone provide one pro and one con for launching an Indiegogo, Kickstarter, or Patreon for a video series?
For video series. Do you want like so the question was one pro and one con for launching on Kickstarter, Indiegogo, or Patreon for a web series. Someone asked me to repeat questions just for the live stream. Patreon. Patreon's a subscription model of like, hey, I have a web series, and if you support me at $10 a month, I can build that up to a certain point and have an ongoing production fund. Particularly great for YouTubers, Twitch, live streamers, that kind of stuff. So one pro and con of each, or just like kind of versus each other. Okay, so pro of Indiegogo is excellent customer service, great metrics, and actually great design. I mean, I kind of like everything about their site except for their con, which is the flexible funding, in my opinion. It has a much lower, which basically means you get to keep what you raise. They do have fixed funding, which is all or nothing, but people don't know that. So it's kind of like running a flexible funding campaign anyway. And that has a much lower success rate. People don't want to be first money in. If you're trying to raise 50,000 and you're at 10,000, no one wants to be the person who funds you from 10 to 40. Kickstarter is the opposite. The great thing about them is their all or nothing model. It's why they've become the market leader in a shorter time. But everything else about them, I'm not a huge fan of. There's really no great customer service to speak of. Almost every single one of my campaigns becomes a staff pick. It doesn't really mean anything anymore. There's just not a great built-in support. Patreon is I don't have a ton of exposure to it other than through my network. I'd say the pro of it is that if you begin to build a series and you put out content on an ongoing basis, you will build an audience that way. And so I think having a place for that audience to express their appreciation, a la sort of a special tip jar, I think is great about it. The problem is that I don't think anything's going to come in until you have that audience and you've delivered good, consistent content.
Okay, time for one or two more.
Besides Slated, can you guys recommend any reputable equity crowdfunding sites?
Well, I see the CEO of Flash Funders sitting in the back. He might, I would start there for Reg CF. What, you guys want to jump in on title on A+ or anything like that?
Start Engine is a good one that we've used in the past.
Up front.
It's mostly a question for Jennifer on the crowd investing. I'm wondering what the legal risks are of doing that kind of Title III investment. How small the investors become and how worrisome they might become down the line, particularly on film projects where everybody gets very overexcited and seems to bring out sometimes the worst in investors.
Well, there are a lot of issues there, and I, don't want to dominate too much of the time here. But, anytime you bring investors into your company is always a risk. So whether or not they're going to, stay the course or be complainers or whatever. The crowdfunding regulations made it possible from a securities law point of view to bring these people in. It doesn't address any of the corporate law issues that shareholders have by virtue of being shareholders. So they still get to vote in your company. They still have inspection rights. They still have dissenters' rights. So how you form that up front, which is what I was saying earlier about the planning, what sorts of rights you give them, where you form the company, what state rights you provide to them, what sort of, buy-sell rights, et cetera, are really important to kind of keep control of the masses. But at the end of the day, shareholders have rights under, corporate law in whatever state you form your entity, so you have to deal with whatever those rights are if they're unhappy or unsophisticated people. That is, I think, for people who are giving equity in their companies, probably the biggest risk is that you really can't do diligence on the people who are coming into your company.
And I'm going to weigh in on that. That make sure you work with there's some things a reputable broker-dealer can do to help with that, because you can technically do some of this stuff outside of a broker-dealer. Like Reg A+, you don't necessarily need a broker-dealer. But like, for example, Flash Funders has some transfer agent services which can really help a ton when it comes to investor management. And other broker-dealers can help with investor management as well. So there are some professional services out there, and like companies like Viafolio are starting to step into that gap to generate liquidity and that kind of thing, broker services. So there is some level of sophistication that's coming online, but it's still early days.
Yeah. Excellent. And that's actually our time for today. Got to cut the presentation right now, but another applause for the panelists here. I believe everyone will be here afterwards as well, too, and can take private questions and answers.
And thank you for being an amazing
Yeah,
moderator.
totally jumped up.
Thank you.